record is pressed, bug on, I'll bugger off.
Bandwidth for VT Talk is provided by vaporworld.co.uk.
Well, hello. Good evening. It's Wednesday night, towards the end of November. The date somehow escapes me, but that's a product of age. No, it's a product of experience, and I am very experienced. Tonight's show, VT Talk, features Professor Gerry Stimson once more. And we're really looking forward to this. There's, I hope, more information on what's been going on or what hasn't been going on, what we know and what we don't know, and there are all kinds of things we're going to talk about, and that'll be straight after the titles. And here we are in the studio with, over my left shoulder, as you can see, Professor Gerry Stimson, Professor Emeritus, I believe it is, Gerry?
That's correct.
And world-renowned expert on harm reduction in all its various forms. And as has been, you've been characterised by a great many of our viewers as being one of the good guys, if not the goodest.
Okay, thank you.
Which is well cool. And sitting in what we call chat corner, but not the corner, is the effervescent loveliness that is Sav. Good evening to you, Sav.
Good evening, everybody.
So the team is fully assembled, and we'd better kick straight off, I think, Gerry, and talk about the World Health Organization.
Before you do, Dave, can I interrupt you? People are saying that Gerry sounds a bit low, so you may want to turn him up a little bit.
I don't know that I can, but I'll try.
Should I turn myself up a bit? No, I don't think I can.
Let me just...
Okay, is that better? Should I talk a little bit louder?
I think I've got you a little bit louder there.
Okay.
Can Chad come back and tell us, please?
Yeah. Yeah, oh. That's better. Kat says that's
okay, good.
Lovely jubbly. Right. I'll keep juggling the sound as we go and try and keep it up there. Yes, when last we spoke, Gerry, we were talking through what had been going on with the World Health Organization, and people were aware that you were going to try and gather more information for this week. What have you discovered, if anything?
Very little, and that's a bit of a surprise. And I think I was chatting to you earlier, and I think you found very little as well. The silence is rather deafening. I mean, normally with WHO and UN type meetings, you get the report of the meeting almost as it closes. I mean, the Secretariat are writing the report, but there's been a silence this time, and I really don't know what to make of that. You know, whether it's to do with you know, the attempt to bring electronic cigarettes within the purview of FCTC, and that we gather failed, but not a lot of news coming out. On the e-cigarettes issue, what I pick up from somebody who's in pretty close contact with many who went is that that was kind of kicked into long touch. As you know, there was an attempt by the WHO Secretariat. There was a document on bringing e-cigarettes under the purview of SCTC.
Yes.
But it looks like there was a bit of a rearguard action against that, and the thing's being kicked into long touch with a plea for, need for new evidence, take your time and revisit it at a later date. So I think that's probably good news in that, in a sense, it's not bad news. No decision is better than a bad decision.
Absolutely, and if they've decided to go for more information, that too can really only be a good thing. If they're going to be looking at finding out more about how these things work, they're not likely to be able to discuss it until the next conference of the parties, is that right?
That's right, and I think we're going to see a speed up of information and evidence about new nicotine products generally. And, in terms of what's going on in the UK, we're feeding into that international debate, and there are good things happening here with NICE and, other developments. So I think, it can't be a bad thing that there was no conclusion reached at FCTC. So, the more time we have, the more delays, the better. In my view, it's not too bad. It's better than a decision being made that's a wrong decision.
Absolutely, I would agree with you 100%. And I have to say that I'm heartened by what I've been reading in various different areas. There have been one or two news reports that have kind of skirted around the e-cig thing a little bit, and I'm pretty sure it's not an old story that's been republished, but there was a further report that the nudge unit, the government's nudge unit, was pressing quite strongly for e-cigs to be taken on board more or less as is. Do you have any further information on that? Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't know if that's an old story, because that was reported quite some time back, but it's surfaced again. So I think it suggests it's still live. And that's, the messages I get coming, from Department of Health are all pretty good ones. I know everybody's a bit scared about what MHRA might do and so on and so forth, but there seems to be a political level in Department of Health and in the nudge unit that these are good things. So that's good. It then raises a question about what the UK is doing at an EC and at a WHO level, because one would expect that message to be filtering through politically at those meetings. And I just don't know if that is the case or not, because they're not close enough to what the UK delegations are doing. It's not always the case that the delegations reflect what's going on, as it were, domestically. I know in the drugs field, there's often a difference between what's being said at international meetings and what we're doing at home. But I think the report of the nudge unit on the nudge unit, another sign that things are going in the right direction here. I continue to be optimistic.
Well, I've got to admit, since last we spoke, after the trough of despond where nothing came out of the World Health Organization, we had no information and I had no clue. To me, bad news is always anything that's held back. I could not for 1 minute think of a reason why they wouldn't publish unless it was unfavourable to what had been proposed by the Secretariat. And patently, given what you've said, it is unfavourable to what the Secretariat had come up with and the recommendations they were making, because they were looking for e-cigs to be banned on all kinds of spurious grounds. And I'm beginning to think that perhaps all of the high-profile bloggers and people like yourself and Clive Bates and various others have actually had some effect in this. I hesitate to call it lobbying, but it's kind of, or rabble-rousing, but it's opinion-making, It's
advocacy, it's putting pressure on or whatever, and we need a lot more of it. And the Clive Bates letter was excellent, and I think you've discussed it, but, there was very good points in the letter, and then the follow-up comments from lots of different people, very significant people, following up and reaffirming that point about harm reduction. So I think that's good, and we need things like that, and we need more of them. And this is one of the things we touched on last time we spoke about, the need to not just talk with each other about these issues, but be more outward looking and to lobby things like this, lob them and lobby them, with the views of consumers. And in the tobacco field, the consumers don't really have a voice. You've got the big anti-tobacco organizations, as it were, speaking on behalf or saying what should be done. But as I said last time, a marked absence of a kind of a joined up community voice about what needs to be done about nicotine. And that's what I'd like to see happen over the next few years. All the energy that's currently going into people chatting with each other, exchanging information with each other, actually turning that outwards and starting to send the letters to the Department of Health, setting up organizations, setting up associations, international networks. I think there's a lot to be gained from that.
Yeah, again, I would agree. Do you think, and I'll just bounce this one off you because you know how the WHO works. Well, not necessarily the FCTC, but certainly the World Health Organization as a whole. Reading through all of the documentation from the fifth conference of the parties, and I have now read every word, and my God, there's loads of them. Everything that's come through to me says, if you don't agree with what we say now, if you're not on the bus, if you're not going to the same place, we don't want to hear from you. Is there any way that we can bring pressure onto the World Health Organization to say, look, there are groups of people that have an interest in this. These are the people that are directly affected by this. These are the people that are using electronic cigarettes. These are the people that are perhaps are current smokers, whom you are demonising terribly, World Health Organization. Is there any way, do you think, that we can bring pressure on them so that we could have a delegation at the next conference of the parties and actually have even just observer status or the ability to give some input so that they can understand where the electronic cigarette users of the world are coming from? I mean, I'm pretty sure that they're just going to put their hands up and say no to cigarette smokers, and tobacco companies. That seems cut and dried. But surely to goodness, we're actually, as e-cig users, we're playing into the hands of what the World Health Organization wants if they want to see an end to tobacco use.
Yeah, I know. Let me start with the UN and WHO more generally, and then try to come down to FCTC. Because my experience has more been in other bits of the UN, where there has, for a long time, been a very explicit policy of, in the fancy jargon, engaging affected populations. Now, that has been part of the big WHO public health movement for 10, 20 years. You can't do things without engaging the people who you're trying to do things with or for. It developed a lot more in this kind of more specialist field I was working in for a number of years, in HIV/AIDS, when there was a slogan which developed, which was nothing about us without us. In other words, you can't do anything about AIDS and HIV without getting the individuals and the populations on side, and nothing should be done without engaging them. And so the UN Organization on AIDS, which is UNAIDS, has a big civil society engagement. It has civil society officers. It's been driven very much by community-based interest and community-based organizations. Now, UNAIDS is a good example. There are other bits of the UN system which are not so good. But generally, WHO is okay. And bear in mind that WHO is really meant to be, if you like, the science within the UN system. And clearly things are going wrong with the FCTC approach because the science isn't always right, or they're not looking at the right science. Now, when it comes to your question about FCTC and ability to go there, I don't know, because I'm pretty new to this field, but I know that there is NGO representation. But they're dead scared of groups going who are, if you like, shadow groups representing tobacco industry. So, for example, the growers, tobacco growers, I believe, are excluded. Part of this goes back to the problem that several years ago, many of the smoking groups were actually funded by the tobacco industry. So WHO saw this as kind of, a sneaky foot in the door. But what I think we have to make an argument is that it's not only the ASH, the organisations like ASH and so on, which need to be there, but we need other kinds of consumer and groups and, in UN language, affected populations.
Yeah.
But I think that starts, sorry to go on a bit, but I think that starts with actually setting up groups like that. And you probably have to set up, sort of charitable type associations rather than companies, because my guess is if you go there as an electronic cigarette company producing or selling, they'll say, under their current sort of vision, they'd say, well, that's really tobacco industry. So I think we've got to find the kind of groups which could go there, which would be acceptable. That's the first step.
Yes,
to
well,
get voice in there. I mean, it's going to go on, but it's a little complicated. But some of the ins and outs of this as well, I'm sure.
Well, I do some, and we already do have a group, and I know Sav's got some information from chat, because I can see the look in her eyes. Sav?
Yes, I'll start with the information about that, and then if we've got time, I'll cover some of the other stuff that's came through. Russell VR Orders said there is a UK organisation called ECHA that has been set up as a voice to represent e-cig users. And Sam Monroe has said, with regards to ECHA, we as the people using the things, and have been for some time now, are best placed to inform on the matter, and ECHA is the vehicle from which we can air our concerns and suggestions.
Absolutely the case, and I see Dave Kay's just typed into chat, and he's probably not wrong, that folks that have started with e-cigs in the last 6 months are probably not even aware that ECHA exists, and perhaps we need to make them more aware of that. But you were saying that there are mechanisms, Gerry, by which we can get this nothing about us without us kind of thing going on. So what steps would ECHA need to take to bring that about?
Well, ECHA needs to be better known. You need to see how you get observer status at particular meetings. Or I went through this when I ran an international NGO on international non-governmental organisation on drugs, and we eventually got UN status, so we could go to any UN meetings as observers. But I think for each particular bit of the UN, you can apply to go as observers, but you've got to get some sort of association status. Not just a bunch of people who've given themselves a name, but you have to go down a little route, I think, to become some sort of charitable or some sort of recognised association. So that's the first step. But can I just add, when I did drug policy reform advocacy, we worked with lots of organisations all around the world. Many of them were tiny. But when we wanted to put pressure on, we wanted to write a letter to the head of United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime to tell them what was going wrong, we could get 200 organisations internationally to sign up to a letter. Now, it's a drip effect. They're not going to sort of turn around and say, well, yeah, we really believe you, and, you've shown us the light. But it's a drip. It's a constant pressure that you have to keep up. And the more you can develop organisations in the UK and then link with organisations in Europe and wider, because in the US, I think, the politics of e-cigarettes is better developed than here. So learning from each other about how to get your voice heard, getting responses in the paper when there are things, there's lots of things, but it might even be worth ECHA meeting up with, because I don't know who's in ECHA, but it might be worth trying to set up a meeting with people in ECHA and people who've done lobbying in another area, just to learn some of the tricks of the trade.
Indeed, yes. I think that could be a valuable move to take, and certainly I think it's worthwhile brokering a sort of a get-together with ECHA, which is the UK. Sav, can you read out the list of countries that people have just said have organisations in?
Yes, we have organisations in Germany, in the United States, in Finland. In Germany, it's the IGED. Let's see what else we've got. US, it's obviously CASAR, and the new one. e-cigs has been mentioned, which is the trade association. I'm not sure which countries they now represent. I think it's Europe, isn't it? The answer Finn has said we should have one global or European organisation. Maybe we would get heard better.
Yes.
So there are quite a few starting to appear.
So just on that point, when I worked in the International Harm Reduction Association, that's the lobbying I was talking about, we worked with regional harm reduction associations, and we helped to establish them. So we set up a harm reduction association in the Middle East. There was an active one in Eastern Europe. We helped to set one up in Europe. We tried to set one up in Africa, but it failed. But we were trying to develop both national groups, but then get those into local networks, because the regional thing is very important in many of these things, especially in Europe, where a lot of the decisions will be made at a regional level. So almost your networks and associations have to mirror other regional bodies, at a political level. But I think we're really early days, but I think got to harness the energy and the interest that is there and get it looking outward, and sending the letters to the minister, asking for a meeting with civil servants, so on and so forth.
Yes, I would agree, and I can see that there's a lot of chat going on between the viewers in the chat room.
Yes, there's a lot of discussion about ECHA going on, because a lot of people don't know who ECHA is, and ECHA are. I'll read out what Russell said. He says, who is ECHA? It's the consumers who care and a committee elected to air their views. The views of the consumers are not being aired to the committee, hence there is no activity with ECHA.
I think it's safe to assume that what we've been discussing so far tonight is of interest to everybody, and that perhaps it might be worthwhile ECHA and other interested organisations in getting onto all of the forums and making their voices heard and saying, look, we need to have a seat at the WHO table, and the only way we're going to be able to do this is by, as Gerry says, forming a worldwide lobbying organisation, each of which works hand in glove with the other, communicates hand in glove with the other, and takes the steps that's required to do it. It's something we're going to keep on coming back and looking at, I think. Yeah. But what I'm going to do just for the moment, we'll leave that one there, take the adverts, and when we come back, I've got a piece of video footage to play in which Gerry was instrumental with. I will say no more than that. Quite surprised him when I told him I had it handy. I've already G+'d it and tweeted it and Lord knows what, but I'd love everybody to watch this, because there's a couple of points that I think we can make that might be useful to ECHA and this nascent organisation that we've been talking about. So don't go anywhere, we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Vaporworld.co.uk sponsors conversation on VT Talk.
GG, because you want one.
iVapor and iVapor Elixir, based in Yorkshire, for your e-cig needs. That's ivapor.co.uk and ivapor-elixir.co.uk. iVapor and ivapor-elixir.co.uk are proud sponsors of vaportrails.tv.
And now back to conversation on VT Talk, sponsored by vaporworld.co.uk.
And we're here on VT Talk with Professor Gerry Stimson, the world-renowned expert on harm reduction. And we've just been chatting about the World Health Organization, but I did say I was going to play a little bit of video in, which I hope will play okay. I'm looking for some wood to touch. That'll do. Me head, for those that are listening rather than watching. And this is Professor Carl V. Phillips, PhD, Dr. Carl Phillips, who again is one of the good guys and who's been doing a lot of research on how the uptake of e-cigs can grow and why city populations and indeed populations and communities, if you like, such as ours, are so important. This is a fantastic watch. It took place at a conference that Gerry organised. Such is the power of the man, the goodest of the good guys. Watch the video and we'll chat about it after.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me here. It's generally agreed that smoking, of all the things that many people choose to do, is the most hazardous for one's physical health. There's an enormous amount of study and discourse about this, but there's a remarkable failure to understand why smoking is a health problem. Because it's not the tobacco, it's not the nicotine that causes the harm, it's the smoke. And so we have a perfect opportunity for harm reduction. The benefits and the costs are actually coming from different sources. And therefore, tobacco harm reduction, as was said, the substitution of low risk, which basically means smoke-free, tobacco or nicotine products or policies to encourage that, is tremendously potentially beneficial. Indeed, I would argue that it's the most promising, unrealized health intervention in the Western world today. So what are we talking about with low-risk interventions? Smokeless tobacco, also known by its Swedish word snus, has been around for a very long time and has resulted in a lot of substitution. But the action right now is in e-cigarettes, electronic cigarettes that are electric-powered nicotine inhalers. Substitution with one of these smoke-free products, or any other smoke-free product for that matter, is almost as good as abstinence from the point of view of health outcomes, and it's better from the perspective of the users who choose it. It works. It's demonstrated low risk. There's a huge amount of epidemiology on the smokeless tobacco that shows that it's about 1/100th as harmful as smoking in terms of physical health risk. We don't know quite as much about the electronic cigarettes, but there's every reason to believe that they're down close to the same range. There's also demonstrated effectiveness in the real world. Snus has been a long-established success in Sweden that has the lowest smoking rates anywhere that smoking has ever taken hold, because most would-be smokers now use snus instead, tucking a little bit of unburning tobacco into their lip. Norway has recently followed their neighbor down this path, and in the United States it's been a strong ongoing trend. Not so much here, unfortunately, because in a bit of policy insanity, it's not legal. E-cigarettes are the real explosion, though, right now. In my country, in this country, and several others, there's very rapid growth of the adoption of these products. You can see some of the many examples there, or here. And again, for the moment anyway, they're legal in most places and are a very satisfying substitute for smoking for many people. Why should we support THR? Well, there's a simple health or pragmatic argument that says, in spite of every abstinence campaign that we can think of, lots of people still choose to smoke. And THR is the only proven method to reduce smoking below about 1/5 of the population, as we've seen in Sweden and some other subpopulations. Moreover, if your inclination is to say, well, that's good, but let's give abstinence a little bit longer to work. How long is it going to take? Because it turns out that for the average smoker, smoking for just 2 more months creates as much health risk as using snus for the entire rest of their life. There's also even stronger ethical and economic arguments to be made that it's better to improve people's welfare with a good alternative rather than just coerce them into behaving the way we want them to. But whether you buy the arguments or not doesn't really matter, because THR really is happening, not because of efforts of those who call themselves public health, but despite their efforts, because there's actually an active campaign against the adoption of THR. I certainly don't have time to go into why and how right now. You can look at my blog if you want more information. But I can address one particular claim here, which of all the THR claims out there is a particularly thorny one, that smokers really aren't interested in switching to low-risk alternatives. Why do we know that? Because not too many of them have done that so far. Well, let's take a look at whether that's really a very convincing argument, looking at how THR adoption is a social process, a social contagion in a good direction in this case. A few people will adopt a low-risk alternative just because they read about it being low risk, realize the advantage, and are mavericks and go out and try it themselves. But most people will not make such a move away from cigarettes to some funny device like this until they have the social education, the support of other people who are doing it around them. They get a little bit of mentorship in using the product and so forth. And so we need social dynamics to understand how the adoption is going to take place. Simple book knowledge just doesn't get you there. So we've created a social dynamic model, which I'll demonstrate in a second. The basic parameters of it: you have a population of smokers, starting with a few of whom have already switched to tobacco harm reduction. You have social networks of people who interact with each other closely, and then there's a little bit of interaction in the society as a whole. And education builds up every time a smoker encounters someone who uses e-cigarettes. Let's make it concrete. They learn a little bit more about e-cigarettes. They feel a little bit more comfortable about the prospect of using them. And smoking seems a little bit less normal to them also because of that. And when their utility from this educational process builds high enough, they switch. This is a movie. You can see time moving in the graph down in the corner. This is an abstract representation of a social space, with each red dot being a current smoker and the green dots being a current e-cigarette user, with the connections in between them representing close social ties, and then there's some social ties throughout the whole picture. Time is progressing. It's not actually a bad abstraction that each unit of time there is a day during the adoption of e-cigarettes. So you can see that a few years have already passed here with a few people using the products, but not very many, and not too much is happening that you can see. You can see that the use is starting to creep up now, as you can watch a new green dot appear every now and then within one of the social networks where this new behavior has already become accepted and demonstrated. Now, what you're going to see very shortly is a very rapid change. A tipping point is reached in the dynamics of this model, where all of a sudden you go from just maybe barely as a casual observer being able to notice that a few people at the pubs are using electronic cigarettes to a huge sea change. And this is not something that was engineered to create in the model. As it turns out, every version of this model we created, every parameterization we could come up with, so long as we started with the same basic notion of social dynamics and education as the driving force, had this feature. And so we're coming to that in just a second. And the vast majority of the switching that will ever take place takes place, for practical purposes, almost all at once. So we're 6 years down the road in terms of adoption, and then all of a sudden, boom, in what's effectively a month. Perhaps an exaggeration. Obviously, this is an abstract model. We have a huge change. Not everyone, because what we have here is a heterogeneity of willingness to switch. We had a few early adopters who were very willing to switch. We still have a few holdouts now who are very dedicated to smoking, but you saw what happened. And this is a continuum. There's not something different about the people who tipped in. That's entirely a dynamic phenomenon of what's going on here. So this illustrates, draws a picture of the social dynamics of how we think THR is actually happening, and it tells us a bit. Yes, it's just a simulation. We can't, figure out dates and times from it or anything like that. No empirical information. But as I said, that tipping phenomenon is almost always is always there, and basically for any parameterization, which suggests, going back to the original question, that the reason that we haven't seen a huge change in most populations, basically other than Sweden and Norway so far, is because we're just not quite there yet. But it's looking like with e-cigarettes, particularly around here, we're getting very close to the point where that's likely to happen. And the reason it happens is because though you haven't seen much, what's going on below the surface is a latent accumulation of knowledge and appreciation for the option. A lot of people are saying, oh yeah, I've heard of it, I've considered it, let me see how it works, and that's enough to tip them over. So why is this a matter of city health? Well, density matters a lot. A sparse population won't have so much opportunities for learning. More people means more learning. More people means denser social networks. And for e-cigarettes, the actual hands-on physical learning is important. You can read as much as you want about this on the internet, but until you see someone show you exactly how to use it, it's a little bit tricky, and show you a good product, you're not likely to make the switch. In fact, I think I converted one smoker who's in this room right now already this morning, who had heard of it, who had thought about it, but until I demonstrated and let him use it, wasn't quite ready to make the change. Density. Just one graph to illustrate the density. The middle beige line is the base run that you just saw. The purple and barely visible yellow line represent denser places like this, and you can see how much more rapidly it takes, whereas the blue represents a relatively sparse population or a very spread out population where it's not likely to take for quite some time. Even still, you still have the tipping phenomena, which I found really quite interesting when we started doing these experiments. So, the song goes about New York, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, suggesting it's more of a challenge there. Quite the opposite in this case. It's much more likely that e-cigarettes will be adopted in, well, probably not New York, but London is a very good candidate for that, and be adopted in a very widespread fashion and move out from there. One last tweak to the model. Obviously, I can't show you too much about it. This is a case that time here has started at the point where the previous version of the run, same population, had already tipped into very widespread e-cigarette use. They haven't gotten there yet. Why not? Because those buttons over there on the right represent educational campaigns. They can be positive or negative. They can be constant or one-off. This is the result of a constant anti-THR education campaign, very much like the one that currently exists in most of the Western world, where smokers are being told, in effect, you might as well smoke. Don't consider switching to these alternatives. They're not a perfect solution. It's either abstinence or forget about it. And eventually we get there, but it took a lot longer. How much longer? Well, here's a demonstration of, again, this more or less the same population. Blue is the baseline model. The same amount of education, more or less, in an abstract sense, in a positive direction. The green or purple lines speeds things up, though, frankly, not all that much compared to the natural social dynamics. The beige line is a one-off education campaign that's trying to discourage people from adopting e-cigarettes. The one-off campaign turned out to not have a terrible effect, though it was certainly negative in terms of getting people to quit smoking. The yellow line, however, represents a constant background anti-e-cigarette, anti-tobacco harm reduction message. And you can see that, even though it was very modest in terms of its actual magnitude, turned out to have a tremendous effect. It kept people smoking for 10 years longer or 5 years longer, depending on how you interpret the time pattern there. So to sum up, tobacco harm reduction is at its heart a social movement. It's self-sustaining and populist, though the free market plays a crucial role in terms of consumer choice and product innovation. That's just a little pushback against some of the anti-free market messages that come up in contexts like this. I'd like to claim that those of us who are working on it help a little bit. tipping seems very likely to occur. That's what we've seen in the real world in the few places that we've moved into it, and that's what this model suggests is almost an unavoidable consequence of the social dynamics. And in the US and the UK, we actually, with regard to e-cigarettes, seem to be in that upswing portion of it that comes just before the tipping. That is, the change may be quite subtle for a casual observer, but I think there's a huge reason to be optimistic about this. But unfortunately, a constant anti-THR diseducation campaign can dramatically delay the ultimate tipping point. And finally, I want to acknowledge my collaborator, Niraj Barua, and in honor of him as a geography student, here's a version of this overlaid on London. We actually intend to create a much more genuinely geographically modeled version of this using London, but we haven't managed to secure enough computer time to run something quite that big yet. So we'll get to that. And there's some contact information for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl.
There you are. That was Carl Phillips, and showing you how e-cig growth can happen, and it would tip. Now, Gerry, you were there for that. Before I bring you in, though, I've been reading chat, and there's, Sav, I think you can confirm there's been a lot of chat about ECHA, and while that was playing through and while I was reading chat, I've come up with an idea. But do you want to give us a few edited highlights, and then I'll sing my idea out?
Well, I haven't copied down a lot of the stuff about ECHA, but there's been a lot of conversation about, well, first of all, people don't actually know who ECHA are and what they do. And from the other side, ECHA are getting frustrated that nobody's talking to them. And it's been going backward and forward on that sort of level. And that's where we are. So if you want to go with your idea.
Well, here's an idea. Picking up from what Carl said, and if I get any of this wrong, Gerry, please shout out. It would seem that the strongest growth in e-cigs happen from a small nucleus in a relatively dense population. My thinking is that it would be a damned good idea if ECHA could organise mini-meets. The meetups, the likes of which we had at the Rattler and then onto the Sundial, the likes of which we have in Tamworth in May, all of these little mini meets that are going on, ECHA can organise. Now, we're here to tell you, and Sav will confirm, they can be done at zero cost. Is that correct, Sav?
Absolutely.
So, why doesn't ECHA organise mini meets all over the country in places where there's already a strong nucleus of e-cig users and build up the uptake in those areas where there is that strong nucleus and where there is a fairly hefty concentration of population? That would serve two purposes. One, it would contribute towards the proper education of people as to what e-cigs are, because if it's held in a public place, people will see them being used by a lot of people, and as we've seen, the more people use them, the more people will use them. And secondly, they'll get their name and what they stand for and what they're trying to do out there. And the third side of that is they'll build up the numbers and gain the strength to be able to contribute to this worldwide organisation that we've been talking about, that is hopefully going to lobby the World Health Organization. Now, that's just something that came to me while we were watching that video and before we decided to discuss it. And I want to throw this at Gerry because it's something, it's just an idea that's hit. Does that sound feasible to you, Gerry?
I think so. I mean, it's always difficult when you're starting a new organisation or a new movement, because, just had the chat coming in about, some people don't know about it, what's going on. Others are a bit upset that they don't know, that the people don't know what's going on. So the more occasions you can use to meet with people, to explain what you're doing, to build up interest, that can only be good. I mean, just don't, these are early days. It's a matter of building up interest, getting the message out there, getting meetings with people, trying to build up, a good national network, forming the links with other networks in other countries. And out of that, I think will come some good things. I would also suggest that it might be good to get together with people from ECHA and people who've done advocacy work in other areas. People who are a few years ahead of the game. in comparison with them. So I think there's a lot of cross-learning, a lot of ideas that might come out from that. And maybe, I think I should make contact with Eka and just bounce across a few ideas.
I'd be more than happy to put you in touch. And in fact, both Sam Munro and Russell are in there, although Russell's not part of the organisation at the moment, I don't think.
You can tell from my looks and age, I'm not sort of a hugely active sort of street advocate and activist, but I know lots of people who are, and who've done lots of good politicking. So I think that there's something there. And I also, selfishly, I think it's also good for Eka to meet people and try to interest other people in this, because I've been struck how a lot of the drugs policy people, the alcohol policy people, are not at all interested in tobacco and nicotine policy. And I think there's a lot of crossover, a lot of mutual interests.
Oh, I think you're right. I mean, I'm firmly convinced that drugs, alcohol and tobacco go hand in hand for all sorts of reasons. Yeah. But as an ex-musician, I probably better take that no further. Let's just say that nicotine, alcohol and one or two other substances were my very good friends in my formative years. So yes, I might have a little experience in that direction, but we'll say no more than that. Let's go back to Carl's piece there. And I know, you know, this was part of a conference that you organised. How did that resonate with the rest of the conference that was there? Actually, before we do that, I'm sorry, I've got to take the second advert, or I'll get my wrist slapped. And we'll just hold on to that thought, hold on to that question. When we get back, we'll go into it. We'll be back in 2 ticks.
Vaporworld.co.uk sponsors conversation on VT Talk. And now back to conversation on VT Talk, sponsored by Vaporworld.co.uk.
And we're back in the room with Gerry Stimson, Emeritus Professor at Imperial College, isn't it, Gerry?
Yes.
Yes, and as I say, world-renowned expert on harm reduction. The goodest of the good guys. That's my little sobriquet for him, the goodest of the good guys. We were talking about Carl's presentation there, and I was asking how it was received by the assembled throng, because one has to assume that there'll have been some fairly rabid anti-tobacco zealots and anti-nicotine zealots there. Was there, Gerry?
Well, surprisingly not. I mean, Carl's great, you know, because he grabs an idea and runs with it. And this presentation, I thought, was just wonderful. You know, when we were putting the conference on, it's a broader city and health conference, but I was determined to have something on nicotine and tobacco in there, and I was really tearing my hair out thinking, well, what is the city angle? So I was talking with Carl, and he came up with this great idea of looking at the diffusion of e-cigarettes, you know, within cities, and I think he really delivered the goods. Now, the thing about the conference is that there were a huge number of very senior people there in public health, running drug services, treatments, alcohol services, working in a whole range of health issues in cities and responsible sometimes for big budgets. So I was really pleased that he got his message across to that audience. And I must say it was very well received because Carl lays it out so clearly. Every sentence he says, you can back up with the research, with the evidence, so that in that introduction where he says kind of the case for, non-combustible products, so he's very well researched, he's very well informed, and that was just a great presentation. And I'm glad we got it on film because you have a couple of hundred people at a conference, but get it on film and you reach, hundreds more. So yeah, it was a good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I understand the premise that he's coming from, and it's the kind of, it's what you would call bacterial growth, yeah,
it's like social, for want of a better word, social contagion. Learning from other people, and given the way e-cigarettes are currently marketed, you're likely to learn about them by word of mouth, by seeing other people use them. You've got to become aware of them, you've got to learn how to use them, you've got to like them, and so on. So this is kind of a gentle dynamic, but it suddenly reaches a takeoff. I think what he doesn't put in, and it's something which we're going to face, and you may not be so keen on this, but all this is happening without marketing. It's like informal social marketing. What is not good in the model, I don't think, I have to check, but is what happens when large tobacco or pharma companies get into the sale of e-cigarettes. And you can see it would take off even quicker, but of course that may not be a situation which you're particularly looking forward to, but we all know that a large number of tobacco companies are moving into e-cigarettes and new nicotine products. Now, as a public health person, I think that's good. You may think, well, it's going to spoil the kind of the scene and the situation that you're very familiar with, which is a sort of more chatty, lower key, friendship sort of thing. But I think that's the other dynamic that's going to build into the uptake, is when larger companies start selling e-cigarettes and start marketing them, in the sort of advertising marketing sense. So that's going to change.
Well, I actually welcome the involvement of the tobacco companies. The fact that Lorillard has bought out Blue, put 135 million into them, and are funding them to whatever extent it is, it gives them a bigger voice. I come possibly from a slightly different angle from a lot of people, in that I'm completely pro-choice, and I don't deny people the right to use tobacco in whatever form if they so desire, with due regard for other people. That has to be said. So I don't have an anti-tobacco stance, never have had, never will have. I think it's each to their own. But if the tobacco companies are going to get involved and are going to come up with reduced harm, i.e. non-combustible tobacco alternatives, whether it's e-cigs or whether it's the nicotine pyruvate solution that Nico Ventures is working on with Kind Consumer, I'm all for that. The more the merrier. It gets it out there and it normalises what we are doing. What I do object to is the pharmaceutical companies getting involved and telling me I have a disease, because I haven't. So that's kind of my status of where I am. I'm not diseased. I'm a normal bloke that likes using nicotine. I also like using caffeine. And were I a proper Yorkshireman, which I'm not, I would probably be very fond of tannin too, because apparently they drink a lot of tea down there. And I'm sure, there are people wandering about the place that are very keen on Krispy Kreme donuts. That's something I can buy into as well. And quite honestly, I really don't think anybody's got the right to tell us you shouldn't be doing that. It brings up that pussycat that I'm so fond of putting up there. So yeah, that doesn't worry me. I would like to see the top of that graph that Carl brought out. And there is another phenomenon which is going to help that, I think, which we won't have time to discuss tonight, but perhaps the next time you join, I assume you will join us again. But the next time you join us, perhaps we can discuss this other phenomenon which I've noticed, which is taking off big style. and has a lot of ramifications for what we're doing here. Before we bring this show to a close, Sav, have we had much in chat? He said, having seen it going scrolling up at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Right, we've had quite a lot in chat. I just want to read one thing to sort of close off what we've been saying about ECHA, and then I'll read about the comments from the video. Regarding ECHA, Phil Emerson has said, most people have real lives. The main problem that ECHA and other organisations like them face are people like us. If they say something that we don't like, we shout them down, call them names, or worse. If ECHA is to succeed, it needs input and help from vapers and non-vapers alike. And as Professor Stimson has said, we should be promoting our lifestyle choices, tobacco harm reduction, not a smoking alternative.
+1, agreed.
Yes. And regarding the video, I'll run through some of the comments. Yansu Finn said, that's brilliant. The smoke is the harmful thing. Well, we've known this for a long time. Marco Van Basten has said, that's lots of green dots, so lots of tax and duty, which is where I see things trying to move towards from a government point of view. Debbie Copson has said, I think people are still scared of the safety issues, but they continue to smoke real cigarettes. Go figure. Ratfinks has said, for some people, it's better the devil you know. They know smoking is bad, but that's less worrying than the possibility e-cigs are because they are an unknown. Doc Vape has said, so the key result from this THR individual-based model is not that we should be educating smokers to increase uptake of vaping. We should be countering anti-opinions to speed up getting to the tipping point.
Yes.
And he's also said the results presented in that conference presentation showed that diffusion, i.e. education of new potential users, only has a small influence on rate of uptake. What has a much bigger and negative effect is anti-education campaigns. Surely the focus should be on countering all the bad science claims.
It's an interesting thought. What's your comment on that last one, Gerry?
Sorry, I was thinking of all the other ones. Sorry. I just missed the last one.
Your comments. Your comments on all of that. Just telling me what your thoughts are.
That's really great. I mean, I just think that, you know, there's a real lot of energy and interest. I think the point about organisations, you know, you're always going to get fed up with them when they don't quite represent what you say. So that's something to be dealt with. About, you know, choices of what to use, about information about what to use, so important. And countering the false claims is very important because we get constant misrepresentation of e-cigarettes and new nicotine products. And you just have to leap straight in when people are basically telling you lies about things.
Yes, I would agree wholeheartedly, and I would make a few recommendations to everybody that's watching this. First of all, ECHA, Kazaa and all of the other organisations that we've mentioned tonight, can you Skype each other, email each other, get together on Facebook, do something, talk together. We need you worldwide. We as e-cig users on the ground need you worldwide to get together and get that first step made towards getting the foot in the door with the World Health Organisation and everybody else, because once we're in there, we'll get everywhere else. That's first thing. Second thing, if you care at all about e-cigs, go to the ECHA website, talk to ECHA, tell them what you need them to do, offer your help in whatever time you have available, do whatever you can. I would love to be there fighting, but I think I can probably be more effective doing what I'm doing, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's the second thing. Third thing, get out there. Get meetups organised in public places, indoor public places, so people can see what's going on, and get an ECHA rep or somebody that's prepared to call themselves an ECHA rep with some kind of credential, if you like, from ECHA to be there so that everything can kind of come together, and let's get people organised. The final thing, with just a couple of minutes to go, is have a look at Twitter and all of the various anti-THR lie blogs. Carl Phillips's blog, Google is your friend. If you're on Twitter, follow Gerry Stimson. Get on there and just follow what he says and link to the people. Follow the people that he's following and who follow him. Let's build a worldwide organisation of people who care passionately about the e-cigarettes that we use. And am I getting shouted at now, Sav?
Not yet, but you will be any second.
Right, well in that case, I'll start the credits away. Before I disappear off, I've got to say my grateful thanks once again to Professor Gerry Stimson. Gerry, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure as always.
It's lovely to have you here, and I'm looking forward to having you back. My thanks also to Sav, who's done a sterling job with about 53 million words tonight. Thanks, Sav.
No worries.
My thanks also go out to Kat, who's been wrangling all the questions, and to our viewers. Without you, we'd be nowhere. See you next time.
VT Talk was sponsored by Vaporworld, introducing the straight-up range of e-liquid from the USA containing real tobacco extracts.